Way back in 2019, I bought a new, bigger monitor that was way too big for my old monitor stand. When I couldn't find any stand big enough, I decided I'd just have to make one. I'd never done any serious woodworking before, but in a couple of days I was able to knock this thing out. It gets the job done, and it actually looks pretty good. Now fast forward to 2021. Our living room TV is nice, but it's really too small for the room. We found a deal on a bigger TV and we demoted this one to the game room to replace the one in the cabinet that was also really too small for the room. Problem: the new TV is about 6 inches wider than the old TV stand. I looked and looked for a stand that was big enough and matched our raw wood style and didn't cost more than the TV.
What?
So, just like with the monitor stand, I was gonna have to make my own. After taking some measurements, doing some doodling, and spending some time on the whiteboard, I had a plan. And it was ambitious. Time to head to Home Depot. I took a long time sorting through the really crappy lumber to find all the pieces that I needed. One thing to remember about lumber, a 2x4 is not 2 inches by 4 inches. So the 2x2s in my design are actually about 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. I was finally pretty sure I had all the pieces that I needed, and Tammy had waited as long as she could. So it was time to load up and head back to the shop. Fortunately, we had a really mild winter this year, so our big fancy heater was able to keep the uninsulated shop, not warm, but warm enough. Have I mentioned that I have almost zero experience here? Y'all did see that disclaimer, right? I needed to figure out how to put my whiteboard design together, but I was totally making it up as I went. I had a rough idea, but it's a good thing that I practiced on these scraps first.
It's split.
I did pick up a pocket screw jig at Home Depot for about 20 bucks, but I also had to pick up an extra long drill bit and an extra long screwdriver bit in order to pull this off. Alright, that might work. It was important that I get all of my pieces cut exactly the same, so once I got one piece with the right size, I used it as a guide to cut the rest. I blame my lack of expertise, but I do not have the steady hand necessary to make consistent straight cuts. Therefore, I had to get creative in order to achieve some retroactive precision, like using my circular saw to make all of these cuts match. Also, disclaimer, this is probably really unsafe. That's pretty good. Once all the pieces were cut, everything gets sanded and a couple of coats of polyurethane. Now comes the assembly. I wanted to make sure everything was square, but keeping that way was more challenging than I expected. Sometimes you just have to think outside the box. Who says I can't draw on my workbench? Okay, no splits. There's our first leg. These dividers not only close off the compartments of the stand, but they also support the top. I thought I could use 2 boards to build them since there was no wood available wide enough to do it in one piece, but I just didn't feel like I could get them to line up and stay straight. I'm sure a pro would know what to do, but I gave up. Instead, I cut these boards long ways, which is less optimal with the grain end showing, but they'll work. Again here I'm getting creative to get some precision and probably being very unsafe with my tools. But at least all 3 pieces were wrong the same.
Nope.
I was really excited to see the top in place. I felt like that's when it would start to look like furniture. But...
Oh no! No! What? How is that only 14.5 inches? What? What is this?
remember what I said before about lumber sizes? Yeah.
That is not 16 inches. 1x8s are not 8 inches. These 1x8s are less than 7¼ inches. Ah!
Back to the store to pick up a 1x3, which is actually 3/4 by 2 and a little bit.
Okay.
For the sides and the floor, I decided to use the same pine tongue and groove that I used for our barn doors. Click the I or the link in the doobly-doo to see that project. We needed a lot of short boards cut the same length. I cut one exactly how I wanted it and then used it to make a jig. And once you have a jig, you can just go to town.
Perfect. And now those all have to be sanded and polyurethaned.
The tongue and groove is exactly 1/2 the thickness of my 2x2 frame, which is not 2 inches by 2 inches, right? So I used one long piece of tongue and groove as a support for the floor. When you paint your wood with polyurethane, it needs to sit on a small point while it dries so it doesn't stick to whatever it's sitting on. These little pyramids work great, but I had so many pieces. How was I going to support them all? Time to think out the box again. Then I had that eureka moment. Screws! Tammy helped me pick out the prettiest pieces for the floor. Both ends got cut so that they would fit smooth, neither tongue nor groove, and that's the floor done. Then the dividers. I should mention that everywhere that I put a screw, I pre-drilled the hole, otherwise the wood would have split. The back and sides went on similarly to the floor, except that they didn't need supports because I could put nails directly into the frame. Next, I had to cut out the slots to allow cables through the back. We figured it needed to be at least 1.25 inches so that electrical plugs would fit. We cut 2 big holes and then connected them with the jigsaw. Finally, we got to put on the top. Make sure it's good and square. For the doors, I was really worried about getting the hinges perfectly straight. No wonky doors allowed. I used the included screws to mark where I needed to pre-drill, and I put tape on the bit so that the pre-drill would be exactly the right depth. When putting in the screws, don't tighten them all the way down until they're all in. That way you can make any adjustments you need so that everything lines up.
Ta-da! You're awesome.
We did it! The stand looks awesome. It perfectly fits the room and the TV. I can't tell you how proud I am of this thing. Make sure and subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next project. See you next time.